Hey guys, welcome back to Blind Strike Exotics. I'm John, and today I want to continue my series on kind of ball python genetics for dummies. And today I want to talk about recessive genes. Recessive genes are those like the piebald, which you see here, which is a snake that you normally see where these little white blotches kind of break through and break up the pattern. They occur in other animals too, but I would probably say ball pythons are probably one of the most popular animals that have piebald markings. They're also clowns, albinos, ultramels, and the list goes on. There aren't as many recessive traits as there are codominant and dominant genes. But what a recessive trait is that whereas, let's say, fire or pastel, your snake only needs one fire or pastel gene to make sure that the fire gene is visual. With a recessive gene, the snake has to have two copies of that gene to be visual. So, this is a piebald female, and she has two copies of the piebald gene. So that means both parents need to carry at least one copy of that gene to get a visual piebald. So we'll get into that more here in a couple seconds. Thanks for stopping by. Just a quick kind of state of the union. Maybe a week or two ago, I finally got monetized the channel. So thank you to everybody that watches the videos and comments on the videos. We're growing a lot faster now, especially after my top 5 biggest ball python video. So please, keep watching. I really appreciate you guys stopping by. Like, subscribe. In any of my videos, please comment down below and let me know if there's certain topics you'd like to see me talk about, certain snakes you'd like to see more of, or any questions or comments you have. So thanks again for stopping by, and let's dive into the recessive traits. I want to first start off by explaining really how ball python genes work in general. The recessive genes really don't function any differently than the codominant genes do. There's a heterozygous form and a homozygous form. The difference is you need a homozygous form of a recessive trait to see it. And what that means is homozygous means there's two copies of a gene, and heterozygous means there's one copy of the gene. So, using our last example of the fire gene, which is a codominant gene, you only need one copy of fire to actually visually see it on the snake. So that one is technically considered heterozygous, although in the ball python world, nobody calls it het for fire. It's still technically heterozygous if that snake only has one copy of the fire gene. Now, if that snake has two copies of the fire gene, you can call it a super fire, or you can call it homozygous for the fire gene. All that means, whether it's homozygous or it's super, means it carries two copies of that gene. Now, with codominant genes, usually when you have a super form or homozygous form, it usually drastically changes what the pattern and the coloration of the snake is. And that's really how recessive genes work. The difference is when you have a het, let's take this for example, he's a clown male, leopard clown male. If I had a snake that was het for clown, you would not see visually the clown pattern in the snake because it's only het for clown and it carries one copy of the clown gene. But this boy here, he's a visual clown, which means he carries two copies of the clown gene. So technically, he is considered homozygous for the clown gene. And all that means is that there's two copies of it. The biggest difference between codominant genes and recessive genes is that recessive genes, like clown or pied or albino, require two copies of the gene to make it visually seen by you guys. You cannot get a clown or an albino or a pied with only one copy. And that's where the hets come into play, which we can describe here. And I actually have a het clown female that this guy's being bred with this year to help kind of explain how you know, your odds are going into, you know, breeding when you have you know, a super clown or a homozygous clown versus a het clown, a single gene clown. All right, so there's obviously other genes in these snakes here, and we're going to kind of disregard them. He's a leopard clown, and she's a pastel lesser het clown, but we're only going to pay attention to the clown gene here. So she's het clown, the big girl right here, and that means she only has one copy of the clown gene. And because she only has one copy, because clowns are recessive, you cannot tell that she carries the clown gene with her pattern or coloration. So she's het clown, whereas he is a full-blown visual clown, which means he's homozygous for clown, meaning he has two copies of it. So he's technically a super clown or a homozygous clown, if you want to think of it that way. And that's how I think of it, because I think it makes it easier to look at. You know, any recessive traits that are visual, they're supers. So he's a super clown, meaning if he breeds, every single one of his offspring will have one copy of the clown gene. Whereas if you get into breeding hets, and sometimes they're cheaper to find and easier to find than it is to find, you know, older clown females. If you're breeding a het clown, 100% het clown, let's say, only half of her offspring will carry the clown gene. So, you know, by breeding these two together, I am not guaranteed that I will get clowns out of this combination. I have a very good chance, I think if my math is right, 75% of the babies should come out as visual clowns. The rest of them, they will not be visual clowns, but they'll come out het for clown. So, you know, I could have pastel lesser leopard het clown snakes come out of this, or I could have pastel lesser leopard visual clowns come out of this. So when you're dealing with hets, you're not guaranteed to get visuals out of the combination, but there's still a good shot of it. The part where it gets tricky is where you start getting into 66% possible hets and lower 50% possible hets. And you get that when people start breeding two het clowns together instead of a clown to a het clown, because neither parent is guaranteed to have the clown gene, and there's no way to tell if the offspring have that gene until they're actually bred. So unless it's a very expensive gene, I don't recommend getting any snakes that are less than 100% het, because if you buy a snake that is 100% het for clown or pied or albino, you're guaranteed it has that gene, one copy of that gene. You're not guaranteed that it will pass on to the babies, but you're guaranteed that it has that gene. If you get into 66% het, there's a 66% chance the snake has it, but there's also a 33% chance the snake doesn't have it. So you could be paying a lot of money for a snake that doesn't carry that gene. 66% het doesn't mean that there's a 66% chance of the het snake passing on that gene to the offspring. It means there's a 66% chance that the snake you're buying has the gene. So I think people get confused thinking that if it's 66% het clown, that, you know, 2/3 of the babies will have it. That it only means that snake has a 2/3 chance of having that gene. But it may not, meaning it can't pass along that gene to any babies. So I try to stick to 100% het because you're guaranteed that snake has it, assuming that the breeder you're buying from isn't lying or knows what they're talking about. But it's usually the safer way to go. Better yet, if you can get visuals, you know, the actual visual clown or the visual pied or the visual albino, it's usually the best way to go. but it's near impossible to find visual clown females that are breeder size, or pieds. Albinos, there's usually a ton of albinos at this point, but clown and pied adult females and other recessive genes are very hard to come by because it takes 3 years to grow them up, and a lot of breeders don't get rid of them. They keep them and keep breeding them back into their own collections. All right, so now that we've explained what het means in a recessive gene, het means there's one copy of the gene. Het clown means there's one copy of the gene, and it is not visual. You cannot see the clown pattern when you have something that's het clown. And when you do see a visual clown snake, a ball python, it means there's two copies of the clown gene. And that means it's technically a super form. It's homozygous for clown, and that means that it will 100% pass on the clown, one copy of the clown gene to all of its babies. So going the next step into producing recessive traits is getting other codominant and dominant genes into your morph combos. I showed you my clown leopard male. So he's a clown with one copy of the leopard gene. And I have a couple young pieds here that also have several genes in them. This girl here, who's acting like a ball python, is a pied. As you can see how there's the white splotch there, and then the rest of the pattern and color. She's a pastave, which is Mojave and pastel, possible leopard, pied. And it's possible leopard because sometimes it's very hard to see some of these genes when you mix them in the pied, because it typically reduces the pattern a lot. But so she has potentially 3 codominant genes in this, in her lineage here, on top of the pied. So technically she has 2 copies of pied, because if it's a visual pied, you have 2 copies of the gene. So she's going to pass on 1 copy of the pied gene. She could potentially pass on pastel, Mojave, and leopard as 2. So she could pass on 4 genes to her babies. This little boy here, as you can see, he's also a visual pied. So he has 2 copies of the pied gene, and he has 3 genes. He's a lemon blast leopard. So he carries leopard, pastel, and pinstripe. Pinstripe is one of the few dominant genes, which means there's no super form of it. You can't have a super pinstripe. But he can still pass along pinstripe to all of his offspring, as well as pastel, leopard, and 1 copy of the pied gene. So let's take these 2 snakes, and in 3 years they breed together. Every single one of their babies will be pied, because they're both visual pieds, which means they're kind of super pieds in a way of thinking about it. When you have a super of any snake, super fire, super Mojave, super pied, super clown, they always pass on 1 copy of the gene to every single one of their offspring. And because you have 2 parents and they're both super pied, homozygous pied, or visual pied, however you want to say it, they both pass on. He passes on 1 copy of pied, she passes on 1 copy of pied. And because it's a recessive gene, you need 2 copies to see it. Then all of their babies have 2 copies. So every single baby out of this pair has the pied visual gene set. They have 2 copies. But on top of that, she can pass on Mojave, lesser, and leopard. He can pass on pastel, pinstripe, and leopard, not lesser. So typically, if you're getting into breeding these guys, you want to get visuals of a recessive gene, clown, pied, albino, ultramel, whatever. If not, you want to try to have 2 100% het for a recessive gene. I really don't advise dipping down below 100% het, because you're not guaranteed that snake even has the gene. You could take 3 years to raise that snake up, and you go to breed it and you find out that it doesn't have it, and then you probably spent a decent amount of money on it. They're not as expensive as 100% hets or visuals, but you still don't want to waste money on a snake when you're trying to invest into a project and that snake doesn't actually have that gene. So stick with visuals or 100% hets, and you know these two visuals here, all their babies will be pied, so I'm at least guaranteed that they lay a nice clutch of eggs. Every single one of those babies comes out as a normal pied at the very least, and normal pieds sell for $300, $350. On my last video, I think it was the top 5 tips, when you're getting into breeding ball pythons. It talks about, where to invest your money, whether you want to buy the snakes as adults and all those other things. You want to make sure the snakes you're buying, that you're investing in, if you want to breed them, are a good choice for what your future breeding plans are. Alright, and here I have a little pinstripe pied female, and if you're curious about pieds, you'll see some of them listed as high white or low white. All that means is that, like on this female, she has a lot of pattern, a lot of color, and she's low white, meaning there's really only this little spot towards the back of her tail where there's a whole lot of that piebald white pattern color to her. Now, typically, piebald reduces pattern a lot when you combine it in there, and as you can see, she doesn't look like a typical pinstripe, and that's because of the piebald gene. But there are certain genes when mixed with piebald that kind of have different reactions. Enchi usually has a lot of pattern when you mix Enchi in with piebald, as you can see, meaning it's low white. And there are some genes where they are very high white. I believe spider, it almost kind of just leaves only the head with pattern and everything else is white. And off the top of my head, I can't remember, but you kind of have to search around MORPH market if you're looking at pies to see what certain genes do when they interact with piebald. It's really cool just to kind of surf around and see what happens when you put it into this really cool recessive gene. All right, this girl here, I guess I would consider her sort of medium white. As you can see, maybe half of her back has the piebald color pattern, and the tip of her tail here has a little bit of pattern. You can see coming up on the sides of the belly here where it's wiping out the pattern, and it's white as well. And a little bit on her neck and underneath her neck too. So she is kind of a medium, I guess a medium white piebald. I've never actually seen somebody listed as that. Either they say low white or high white. And if they don't say low or high, it's usually just kind of medium white, which I guess is probably typical for what you're looking for in a piebald. All right, so that is it for today on talking about the recessive genes and trying to kind of explain the easy way to think about it. And to recap, I brought out my Super Mojave male here. Super Mojave is not recessive; it's a co-dominant gene. But I wanted to bring him out because he is a Super Mojave, which means he is homozygous, which means he has 2 copies of the Mojave gene. She's pied, which is a recessive gene, which means you need to have 2 copies of it to make it a visual pattern. So she's technically homozygous or super pied. And so that's the way that I like to look at it. If you have a recessive snake, a recessive gene snake, pied, albino, ghost, clown, if you see the pattern, it's super, meaning it has 2 copies of the gene. Super Mojave has 2 copies of the gene. Visual pied has 2 copies of the gene. So just think of them as super pieds, super clowns. It makes it easier when you're trying to do your math in your head, trying to figure out what your genes are in your snakes. And if you have a non-visual recessive gene, like a het clown or het pied, it means they have 1 copy of the gene. Whereas if we had a regular Mojave, a single gene Mojave, it would technically be heterozygous for the Mojave gene. So hopefully it's not too confusing. I know the recessive genes are typically kind of mix up your brain a little bit more than the visual codominant genes, since you can see the codominant genes whether there's one or two copies. But all you need to know is if you have a visual recessive gene, that means that snake has two copies of that gene, which means it's homozygous or kind of a super form of that gene. And these two are really twisted up here. So hopefully that clears everything up for you guys. I'm going to do, I think, one more video about what are kind of referred to as like allelic combos or axe-like super, which would be like your vanilla creams or your freeways or highways, or mystic potions or purple passions. It's basically the super form of genes, but they're not the same gene. So we'll get into that in the next video, and that'll be the last one in my ball python genetics for dummies series. But I want to get these two away. They're kind of the pied's kind of almost ready to shed, and Shredder's getting the weekend off from breeding season just to kind of relax and take a break. So I'm gonna get them back. I'm gonna edit this video and get it posted here soon. So thanks for stopping by, and please remember to like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments about the recessive genes, please comment down below. See ya.